challenge. So you noticed I also went off and then came back after a while. Thank you, Mr. Mutasa. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. I will not use the video so that I get a better connectivity in terms of my bandwidth, because there are big challenges with network. I want to thank you for inviting us, and also for inviting me to be a panelist in this important discussion, and also wish to acknowledge and thank the other panelists. I missed the Dr. Tata's presentation, but he's someone I always discuss with a number of issues, including this matter. So I think I may have a better account of what the churches are driving. I also appreciate the presentation from Sakile and Prof. Raftopoulos, and by and large would want to associate from a point of view that if we need to resolve the crisis, we also need to be very clear in terms of what we think is the crisis. There are many lenses that people are using to identify the crisis and also to proffer solutions. And it is a sign that we are not all ready to address the problem. For as long as we have not synchronized our views around what the problem is, if we are not also courageous to point out exactly what we think is the problem, we may face some challenges. So I will not want to waste much of the time because most of the issues have been discussed, but I want to point out to the point that what we really have has to be properly conceptualized. And in our view, Zimbabwe has now moved from a failing or weak state to a failed state. I know many people want to be academic, and a lot of intellectualism is brought into this in terms of characterizing it or conceptualizing it. But when we are advocating for a view that a state function must be defined by the eyes and minds of the citizens. So what the citizens in their various classes, in their various social and economic groupings are perceiving and experiencing must lead us to the conclusion that Zimbabwe is a failed state. And in that, we are seeing a state that is completely losing legitimacy. I know many people want to argue about legitimacy in terms of elections, but elections is just a single part of it, and mainly a very small part of it. So putting away the arguments about is it a government by the people, we can also evaluate it as is it a government for the people in terms of its input and output legitimate measurements. How much is it accepting citizens and social groupings inputs and participation to inform its policies and programs? To what extent are those policies and programs benefiting the common good majority? And is the government working for the majority? I think if we look at it from a number of aspects, we can conclude that definitely the government has now failed. For example, if we use these three measures, because the government is there to provide political goods, positive public goods. If you look at the case of human security, Sakile has pointed out the level of people who are abducted, who are tortured. We can't even sleep well in our homes. Our children go to school, we are always scared. Some of us have gone through it. We've had our relatives abducted at our homes destroyed. People are being unlawfully detained, journalists, political activists, trade unionists, everyone No one is spared unless you are not raising a dissenting voice. And it's not insecurity from militias or from rebels. It is insecurity from the state. And once the state behaves like a rebels or militias, you know that the state has disintegrated. We also would want to point out issues to do with social and economic implosion, with people facing starvation, a lot of people in poverty, and almost 38% in abject or extreme poverty, over 70% depending on statistics in poverty, and a lot of people in unemployed and underemployed. We have an economy where all workers are enslaved. Domestic workers are only earning $9, which is only 9 loaves of bread for working for 30 days. The minimum wage can only buy 25 loaves of bread. It's only $25. And this is unparalleled even in colonial or apartheid regime, that someone can work for 9 loaves of bread only. And if you look at the economy, despite the rhetoric from government, everything is on tailspin. We are on a cliff edge. The economy is going haywire. So we are also in a vicious cycle in terms of the economy, with the low levels of salaries, which have led to low levels of savings and investment, low levels of productivity because there's low demand, and everything is going down. So if you look at economic and social implosion, we have that, at least in the eyes of and experiences of the common man, people who cannot pay $190 to hire an ambulance if you are said to be suspecting COVID-19. People who cannot pay $800 to book an ICU bed if you are COVID positive. So these people are actually judged, sentenced to death if they are infected. And if they are to work for their whole lives, they need almost 32 months to just hire an ambulance. So for such a person, that system has failed. For people who cannot pay for online exams or online lessons for their kids, their kids have been sentenced to a poverty cycle where they are not going to be educated and they remain in poverty. If you also look at the capture of the state itself, capture by cartels, capture by the militarization of the state, there's no longer any institution that is independent, any constitutional institution. You can't even depend on the judiciary. You can't even depend on the parliament. Parliament has been rendered useless. You are afraid to go and report to the police. You can't depend on the NPA. All constitutional institutions that are supposed to be independent have been adulterated. So we have a state where all the democratic processes or the constitutional processes have been rendered useless and captured. So there is limited possibilities in terms of relying on the constitution itself. And there are many reasons to why we are here, but I think in short, to cut this discussion short and also to maintain my time limits, I would want to therefore go to the discussion on what needs to be done. I've held dialogues with many people discussing about whether the national dialogue is the route to take. And I want to thank Prof. Raftopoulos for taking us back to history and show the instances where we seemingly had dialogues, but those dialogues were not sustainable, they were not genuine, they were not sincere, they were not taken in good faith, and we only have a ephemeral celebration, very short time. And this is one thing that we need to really guard against. The dialogue of Unit Accord, the dialogue of GNU, that is not the dialogue that we should also be looking at. I want to first of all say we support the ZCTU and labor movement support dialogue if it is the proper dialogue that we think must be there. But for us to have proper dialogue, I don't want to concentrate on the activities of political players because they will always be selfish. They will always be based on their particular sectoral interest. But I would want to dwell on what the citizens may need to consider. And in my view, the best way to get a best dialogue will be influenced by what citizens are doing. But before we even talk about dialogue, there is also an alternative. Dialogue is not the only thing that we have. The alternative is building citizen capacity. The alternative is for mass action. The alternative is for citizens to use their agents. And this is what I want to dwell on. So citizen agents is the best way to address a failed state like Zimbabwe, because it is sustainable. It is also grassroots based, and it can challenge and it can withstand this brutality of the state. So we need to build capacities of citizens and for them to be able to participate effectively in social and political activities. Currently, we see the polarization in terms of political lenses, but the citizens are also polarized in terms of their classes, in terms of their economic activities. So we need to build community-to-community solidarity. Look at the Chilonga community, look at the Wange community, look at the Manicaland community. People are being displaced everywhere, right? Left, right, and center. For as long as we are not able to build community-to-community solidarity, if we let the Chilonga go, if we let the Wangedete community suffer, then we should know that we are far away from resolving the crisis. Even any dialogue around in terms of that environment, in such an environment, will not lead us anywhere. We negotiate with employers, we negotiate with the government. We know that at the end of the day, a good agreement comes from political power play. From power play, when workers strike, when workers go in streets, and we then have a dialogue after, it then comes up with a better agreement, because everyone has got something to lose. Everyone is threatened. Currently, having a dialogue with ZANU-PF, they will be telling us what they want us to do, or telling anyone else what they want them to do. So firstly, community-to-community solidarity. We also need to build class-to-class solidarity. I know in my corner, many people accuse me that you want to cannibalism of our class, but definitely there is no one is spared. We need class collaboration, and it must be built on solidarity. And once we do on solidarity, workers are enslaved, peasants, the tobacco farmers, the cotton farmers, the maize farmers, they're also exploited. They buy their inputs in US dollars, but they are forced to sell in Zim dollar, and their US dollar is transferred to cartels. So we need to build that. And no matter what misgivings we have with opposition MDC alliance, and I want to be very clear, the main opposition MDC alliance, citizens of Zimbabwe have to defend this movement. I am not saying this as a call for supporting it, even if you don't like it. What people should see is that the government is moving on its agenda that it had in the 80s of building a one-party state. And when it needs to build a one-party state, it must attack all centers of resistance. We don't like it. We don't like some of the issues that have happened in the opposition. You don't like how it is configured. You don't like who is leading it. But if they finish with the opposition, they definitely move to another center of resistance. If you are a worker, they are moving to labor. They've already started moving to labor. So the government is destroying any resistance. What people need to do is to then defend those centers of resistance, the labor movement. Students currently are in prison. The student leaders are in prison. Student movement is a center of resistance traditionally and currently. So we need to defend the student movements. We need to defend the main opposition that is being attacked left, right, and center. And its demise is dangerous and disastrous for our way forward. I want to end by saying, once we work together, advancing solidarity and building citizen agents and building an active citizenry, which is the only catalyst for a dialogue. It's an active citizenry, which is also the only guarantor that after the dialogue, people are going to abide by the terms of that dialogue. it is active citizenry. After, if we work together like that in solidarity, that will lead to common ground on difficult issues like one, ideology. Many people want a new Zimbabwe, but they don't want to talk about social justice. They think workers must continue to be working for nothing. They still want to remain with an economy. What they are focusing on is only to deal with the political players that they don't want. But we are saying we need to deal with the main causes of the problem. And to us, it's neoliberalism. The society was attacked the moment the government decided to move on ESAP. And the ZCT was very clear on that. We published a lot together with other academias like Prof. Raftopoulos on how ESAP destroyed the economy and destroyed the fabric, the national fabric of this nation. So that will be addressed. We'll also, in working in solidarity, address issues of political issues that are very difficult. So we need to look at this issue of active citizenry, citizen agency, solidarity, and then ideology as the anchor of any action that citizens must play. And then the solidarity will then grow to regional solidarity, global solidarity. And once we are united in moving solidarity, the international community, the regional community will also assist us. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, comrade. Sorry for not addressing you as comrade earlier when I introduced you. And like a true comrade and a trade unionist, you have been as bold as I expected you to be. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take questions. You can speak, unmute yourself and talk if you want to do that, or you can put questions on the platform. There are many people who have put many questions here, and I see a very long comment just came in as well from Leonard Mandi. So please, you can put questions to each of our participants. Remember that each of our speakers, the first one was the Reverend Dr. Kenneth Mtata, and then with Madam Svela Ngoma, and then with Brian Raftopoulos, and then now we just said Mr. Peter Mutas. If we can please open the plenary now. Those who have questions, can you put your questions through? While I'm still waiting, there's a... Yes, please, go ahead.
No, I wanted to say, Mr. Dr. Mpofu, there was a hand. I think people can raise their hands if they want to speak. It will be easier. There was a hand from Ubutlebenkosi there, Chabang.
Oh, okay, please do. Norma, can you please help me, because I'm using my mobile phone because we had a problem with this, so I probably didn't see that hand. So if people raise hands, Norma, can you give them the go ahead? Bushle, can you please speak?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I just wanted to say, unfortunately, as I was trying to join in, I was having difficulties. So I only got to hear the tail end of Sakile's presentation and only heard the ones that followed. But I think I just wanted to stress the point. I'm not sure if Sakile mentioned that, but I just wanted to say, I think from a women's rights perspective, our issues with national processes are always that we always feel as if women are left behind. Women are not included, so that at the end of the day, the process is not inclusive. And I know that, you know, when we say these things, even at public platforms, sometimes people are like, these women have started. But I think it's a very serious issue to say we just need, if we are, I like what one of the speakers said about, we have to agree about what the crisis is, and then we have to agree about how we actually address the crisis. And I think one of those ways to address the issues, to make sure that whatever process, yes, I agree that dialogue is necessary, but also we have to be clear about who is actually at the table. Because I think as long as we are not at the table, when decisions are made, when the dialogue is going on, it means whatever concerns we have are not going to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Wese. Alson Pepe.
Okay, thank you, Doc. I'm going to make them into one, which does not respect all tenets of democracy. And in a dialogue, it's not the one who maybe is feeling aggrieved, who only benefits. A dialogue is a mutual kind of arrangement where all parties agree that there is a problem and the problem needs to be solved. The solutions that come from a dialogue, they help both the one who is accused and the one who seems to be crying. So in this instance, I think our biggest challenge here is that I don't see government acknowledging the problem that needs us to come to the table and have a dialogue. They are in denial of that. And the last speaker is going on with their so they're not waiting for happening, and unless we may be talking about solutions that are not going to work. This leads me to my second point, which is that the kind of government that we have, I think we need to understand it from where it's coming from. I heard the other speaker saying we have got a new elephant in the room. I think that's what she said, if I'm not misquoting her, but she used the word a pink elephant. The army is not a new elephant in the room. The army has always been rogue in this country. The Gukurahundi atrocities were an official army program. The army was helping the ruling party to go rogue. We have a ruling party right now that does not respect the rule of law. It was aided by the army to do so. But maybe we also need to go a step back and look at the kind of ruling party that we have. The ruling party we have, it's actually rogue elements that renegade from ZAPU and formed their own thing. And maybe these people are doing what they are doing because when they aim was to, they wanted to maybe attain independence. These people, they formed.
You are breaking out, so can you just wrap up?
ZANU PF, Renek.
Pepe, do you hear me?
Okay,
yes.
Joe.
Can I interject? Pepe? I don't hear Pepe anymore. Florence, before you speak, may I just read a few of the comments that I've seen?
Yeah, if you can no longer hear me, let me.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please put yourself on mute here. Please mute here. From Sarah Domen, my sense is that our speakers, the audience, know the problem and the ideas and solutions, but how do we get from one to the other? And then there was a comment from Fire that I wanted to read. There has been concerns about the influence
We can't hear you, Programs Director. We can't hear you.
Okay, my apologies. It's my mic. Let me ask Florence to please speak.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Thank you very much for this very informative discussion. I think mine is, first of all, I've been questioning myself, is it necessary for us to keep on wasting a lot of money on elections? Because at the end of the day, there's nothing that happens after the elections. We lose a lot of millions probably that should have gone to service delivery. That is in a dire situation. So I've been asking myself, is it necessary? And then the next thing that could be the alternative is a dialogue. And my question is, how am I getting into a dialogue when I feel aggrieved? So if I feel that I've been cheated, how do I get in a dialogue, powerless, feeling that the person that's leading a dialogue is the one that has cheated me? How do we deal with pride, probably as leaders, to put citizens first? And then lastly, the fear of losing power. How do we deal with that? Because those are the main issues that will help us to usher a new Zimbabwe. How do we deal with fear of losing power, to say I'm going to be arrested if I'm out of this seat, so I have to die here? Don't we have institutional frameworks that protect the people after a term of office? I don't know, maybe we should also look into those issues as we usher the way forward on the issue.
Thank you, Florence. Can you all hear me now? I think you can. I'll ask our speakers if they want to comment on some of the things that have been said, because no one has raised their hand just now. But before that, there are just three posts I wanted to read. The first one is from Fayayo, who says, there's been concerns about the influence of the securocrats as far as our social, economic, and political sphere is concerned. Do the speakers think there should be space for them in the national dialogue? And then Tewa almost responds a little bit to that. Dialogue is the best avenue. The current environment has the military government organic connection. How best can dialogue be auctioned? I think there was a remark, yes, I just saw it from Sarah Domen. My sense is that our speakers, that is the audience, know the problem and have ideas about solutions, but how do we get from one to the other? Can you speak? And then after that, I'll ask the speakers to just respond to some of the comments that we continue.
Sorry, the hand raised by mistake, so that I have anything now.
I'm a teacher by profession. If someone raises their hands in my class, I ask them to go on and speak. But the speakers, Reverend, can I start with you? Do you want to respond to some of the things that have been said, that have been raised, questions, remarks, comments? Reverend Mtata.
Yes, thank you very much, moderator. I think many of the questions that have been raised have to do with a process, how this process should be prosecuted. There are other issues that have been raised have to do with the participation. I think all these issues are key for a meaningful national dialogue. I think one of the major questions that is being asked is whether members of the security sector must be involved in any national dialogue process. I think they should, because they are now part and parcel of a key process. The question is, of course, how do you make all other participants not feel powerless when you have a table where others have guns and others do not have guns? So how do you create an environment where people will not feel afraid? Sector. But I think one of the issues that have also emerged from these conversations that I think we need to highlight, and I think Sarah Dorman's question relates to this, is the question of now that we know somehow what the nature of our problem and how it should be addressed, but how do we get there? I think one way to get to really have a national dialogue process, I think, is when we have enough national buy-in. So and at the moment, it's important that we are seeing more and more platforms that are trying to interrogate the idea of the national dialogue, and I think this is an important step. There must be a national consensus as a part process towards finding a lasting solution. So I think if this consensus is reached, but also that when it is reached and reach other levels like parliament, and it is agreed within ZANU-PF Politburo, it must be agreed within the opposition politics that we need a broad-based and comprehensive national dialogue where all key stakeholders in Zimbabwe are participating. If we reach that consensus, people can then go to the next steps of how it is convened and what its objectives should be. There will be a common agenda setting process. And so in my view, the first step of having national buy-in, that this is what we need, I think is a step in the right direction. And such platforms allow
I can no longer hear the Reverend. I think your audio just went off.
I thought I had finished. I don't know if you heard what I said at the beginning.
Yeah, I did. Okay, you can mute your mic now. Thank you, Reverend. I'm going to ask Ms. Achilles Felaningoma to respond to some of the issues next. But before I do that, may I just read a few? I just saw this post from Autosac. Just 1 second, Ms. Ngoma. Circumstances, conditions for an inclusive dialogue are not present, nor are they shared. That is Autosac. And then Alec Love says, do you think national dialogue, the post just went away. Alec, I just lost your points. Okay, I've just seen it again. Do you think national dialogue facilitated by credible local and international prominent persons is the best? Elections will always be contested if reforms are not put in place, and the cycle will keep recurring. I think Brian mentioned the role of SADC and the role of South Africa, but I think participants will comment on that again. Ms. Ngoma, please. Sifela Ngoma.
Thank you so much. I will just pick on some of the questions. Some of them I take them as responses that were happening to different questions raised on the chat. I think in terms of going forward, what does this mean? I think it's important to acknowledge that the conversation around dialogue, people talking to each other, is gaining momentum. And I think that if we recall, I know that this afternoon we will have the political actors panel, and I'm sure they will give us more updates. But I'm sure colleagues you'll recall that there was a press statement that was issued by Pollard, and I think it was Professor Maduku who was reading the statement, is it a week or 2 weeks ago, where they talked about how as Pollard, they as Pollard, consider that yes, there should be dialogue, and that the processes of dialogue within Pollard should be expanded, and there should be inclusion of different groups, faith-based groups, civil society, and citizens, etc. I think that is in response to conversations that have been happening around how policy is going in the country, how governance is going in the country. But I think what we are trying to do is to continue to talk about this issue of a national dialogue which transcends the Pollard Forum. And I think it's important to bear in mind that that's what we're talking about. I think it's also important to be able to separate and to imagine dialogue as a series of conversations or a series of platforms that concentric circles that then converge at some point. And it is important to say, yes, whilst you might have a political dialogue on one space, you might also want to have a policy dialogue in another space. And how do you build that, and how do you make it operationable so that all of those dialogues are inclusive, broad-based, and participatory? I think that is the second issue that is there. So designing this framework of dialogue and putting key central aspects. I also think that dialogue should also be considered in terms of in the international space, not just within the domestic space. And we also need to think about who are the conveners of the dialogue. Currently, of the dialogue, the conversation around dialogue that we have is not really a national dialogue. There is a conversation around Pollard being the dialogue space. And if you look at, and I think, we know that there is dialogue in the employee sector, in the labor sector, as it were. We know that there is dialogue in the economic sector. But if you look at all the processes of dialogue that are in our traditional sectors and in our traditional processes and institutions, those processes are not moving forward. Hence the call for a national dialogue, which means that the dialogue can't be just reduced to a political dialogue that only maybe discusses issues around political parties and elections. It is therefore meaning that we need to go bigger than that. And I think that has been agreed. The question is now going forward, what are some of the things that are important? And I think reiterating the point around a national dialogue is important to bring to highlight weaknesses of existing platforms and to be able to then begin to contribute to building an environment where we can have a dialogue. People don't talk because there is peace. People talk because things are not going well. And I put that to the conversation. I also want to raise the point that, I didn't call it a new elephant to say that the military is new. I meant a pink elephant in the sense that if we don't dialogue and talk about the security sector, we are also going to be leaving out something that has been an issue for a very long time. I agree on points around accountability, but also even dialogue processes themselves must be accountable to something or to someone. And we know the limitations of an elite dialogue that is only accountable to principles of a political party at a particular level, because we know that participation and consultation cannot be reduced into such finite platforms. I think those are my responses for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Felani. Dr. Pilani Zamchia, please, just briefly before I call on Professor Raftapolas.
Oh, thank you, Chair, and good morning to everyone. I am wondering whether it's possible at this juncture to have a citizen-driven national dialogue process, then build momentum around it until the politicians are left with no option but to join. Perhaps one can make reference to the period 1997-1998, when ordinary Zimbabweans started demanding for a new constitution. The government started by dismissing it as an imperialist agenda, an agenda of one or two people sitting under a baobab tree. But as there was citizen pressure, the government was left with no option but to try and jump on the bandwagon. Is there that possibility of trying to push for dialogue from below rather than wait for dialogue from above by the political elites? Thank you.
Thank you, Zamchia. Professor Raftapolas.
Thank you very much. In fact, Dr. Zamchia took the words out of my mouth. I think that there's different levels of this process. One is, I think, building that citizen consensus, and there'll never be a total consensus. There'll always be disagreement, there'll always be dissensus, but building core ideas around which you can build a project of mobilization, a project of understanding. and building that pressure from below. The problem we have now is that we don't have the same strong trade union movement we had in the 1990s, which was a formidable force because of its membership. The structural changes in the economy have meant the trade unions don't have that force anymore, but still they are there. There are players, there are other players in the informal sector. There's public sector workers who in many ways are the Achilles heel of the state because they're the largest formal sector workforce, and they're the workforce where the government is unable to deal with wage negotiations. Every time they enter into a wage agreement and they increase nominal wages, they are almost immediately eroded by the inflation. So there's a massive potential to bring the public sector workers into a discussion and into pressure, as it was the case in 96, 97, where the public sector strike was the first indicator that the government faced a problem. The second is the question of how to deal with the region. The Motlanthe Commission, I think someone on the Zoom chat raised this. Issues around the Motlanthe Commission have simply not been dealt with. They're hanging there. This is something that the civil society groups need to take up with the regional body and to say, look, you put in place this commission, nothing is moving around this. It's also a point of possible consensus with the international players. The EU February statement this month made reference to that possibility. The new US administration, we will see where they go with their current position. But I think that the Cotonou discussions, which will engage EU and Zimbabwe government, can be there can be a focus on the Motlanthe issue and how and to get South Africa and SADC forces to begin to push that. So I think there are different levels, and we need to find ways to strategize to bring these levels together. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Eric, before you say something, the speakers may respond to this if they want, even those who have spoken. What Henry posted, what motivation does the ruling party have to join the negotiating table at this particular moment when they seem to be in a comfort zone? Mugabe was forced to the negotiating table by dire political and economic situation, which threatened his grip on power. Eric, you're on, please.
Thank you, Program Director. My contribution is, I think a couple of your panelists, I think Reverend Mtata and Ms. Ngoma, mentioned the fact that elections would not really bring the result that we want. But I think the speakers did not really spend time on the kind of elections that we might want that might bring those results. To me, I think the emphasis should be on free and fair elections. I think free and fair elections, from my opinion, may bring the result that we want. I think possibly that's the reason why there's talk of political reforms, because I think political reforms would then guarantee those free and fair elections. My other point that I wanted to raise was that the issue of dialogue, I believe dialogue of a national nature require state institutions. And I think Mr. Mutasa pointed the fact that most, if not all, our state institutions are not functioning as we expect. So we can't have that kind of national dialogue without that platform that platform that state institutions provide. Then my last point that I wanted to make was the issue of I think some speakers spoke about insecurities. And I think some of the insecurities are coming from people who have committed some heinous crimes and committed criminal offenses. Now that they are scared that they might be made to account. So, I mean, in a situation where you have a dialogue, why would you accommodate some people such that they will not maybe made to account for their actions? I think dialogue should get to a point where if someone committed something, they should be made to account. I think that's where we have another problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Hussein.
Well, thank you so much. I'm looking at the issue of the GNU dialogue, that what really brought it into being. First, it was a highly mobilized citizenry that led to the Save Zimbabwe campaign. And the rest was history. We know that the pressure from Save Zimbabwe campaign, which led to the brutalization of civic society actors and political actors, forced our government to go onto the negotiating table. But we had the regional element from SADC that were willing to solve Zimbabwe's problems. And we had, and also we had an international community that had a lot of interest on Zimbabwe. So my question is, do we still have those ingredients in place that could actually lead to an effective dialogue process?
Thank you, Reverend. I'll ask Comrade Mutasa from the CTU, please, can you speak? I think Brian said something about the nature of the labor movement now, its strength as well. Maybe you can highlight some of those things as well.
Right, thank you very much. And I want to also thank Prof for raising that. And I will rely I will put much of my reliance on his works on trade unions, because there's been a very good resource for us. He has built us. And I want to differ with my teacher in that regard. Why I would want to differ, of course, I want to first of all acknowledge that definitely the nature and structure of unions is different from what it was in the 90s. But in differing with his conclusion that therefore it may be a very, very difficult thing to use unions or any other organizations to champion that, I would point out that currently unions, and not just unions, churches, unions, students' movement, civic society, currently is more powerful in terms of resources and numbers than it was in the 1940s. In the 1940s, the Benjamin Borombos, the Joshua Nkomos even waged a liberation struggle against a very, very brutal regime that had everything to lose. And they came together and formed even nationalist parties, waged a liberation struggle. So I think in terms of resources and numbers, what we may only miss are the ideas. What is that great idea that unites people? So unions, student movements, churches, political players, we are better resourced and better in terms of numbers, but we are fragmented. And much of it is because of the activities of the ruling political regime that we have: infiltration, coercion, co-optation. And those are the issues that we can deal with if we address the idea. What is that idea that can challenge co-optation, that can challenge coercion, that can challenge infiltration? And also, we just need better organizing. Again, we have got advantages. Yes, things are difficult now, but we also have advantages. It was difficult for Morgan Tsvangirai and others to communicate. It is now much easier for Peter Mtasa, Raymond Majongwe, Shamuyarira, Kenyas to communicate with workers because of the tools that we now have and the development in technology. It was difficult to air out views using ZTV, which was the only channel. Now we have WhatsApp and the like. So I think whilst I acknowledge the effects, these effects that our Prof has put forward, we must not cry about the spoiled milk. We still have opportunities, and some rare opportunities that those who liberated us didn't have. And I don't think we need to use this as an excuse. Let us organize ourselves. Let us better mobilize. Let us bring out an idea, a national idea that answers to the national question that unites everyone, and we can do it. Then there is an issue about the dialogue, and many issues that have been raised. I want to try and respond to the many questions around dialogue, around what we are doing and what we are seeking to do. I may bring in a view that dialogue is not an event. and that we, as Zimbabwe, have been holding national dialogue since independence. We've had many challenges and we've been holding national dialogues. And many times we want formal dialogues that are held at Crown Plaza, that are held at Blair Rainbow. And I don't think that should be the proper conceptualization of dialogue that we need to do. All the efforts that we've put into it, all the demonstrations of wars, all the demonstrations.
Try to send Lena a message. She's broken about Karima because we're really good friends.
Who?
Lena, Carl's cousin. She used to be.
Sorry, Alex, S10, can you please mute?
All the demonstrations of Tajamuka, all that people have been putting since independence, you should not even ignore Zoom. You should not even ignore those organizations that were the NCA. All that has been building on dialogue. We're dialoguing. At times you dialogue through a protest. At times you dialogue through petition. At times you dialogue through mass action. So Zimbabwe has been holding a dialogue. Why am I saying this? And this dialogue has produced some outcomes, and this is what is important to me. We deferred, or we abolished or deferred a one-party state agenda that was so strong in the late 80s, and we brought in multi-party political party participation in our politics, despite the dominance of the one party, ZANU-PF. But we achieved that as a nation, as a people. And one of the main outcomes that we brought is the 2013 Constitution. So if we are to dialogue, my question is, what is supposed to be the outcome? And is that outcome going to be, if we're going to come up with an outcome document, is it going to be as comprehensive and all-touching like the 2013 Constitution? You want to dialogue, you want to bring issues of transitional justice, it is in there. You want to bring issues of devolution, it is in there. Political, civic, and political rights, they are there. Transparency, all the issues that we are grappling with, including the separation of powers of state institutions and state organs, they are all there. So what other outcome will we be expecting? That is a very philosophical question that we think, and practical question for that matter, not just philosophical, that we also need to look at. And in that regard, this is why we are pushing for something different. We cannot always have dialogue based on political actors, Mugabe Tsvangirai dialogue, Mnangagwa Chamisa dialogue. We had a national dialogue that everyone contributed, and the outcome is the Constitution. So how do we deal with that? In my view, we need to be courageous as citizens, active citizenry, as I've said, exercise our citizen agents, and push for transformational constitutionalism, which this is what we are missing. And we must not be illusioned. We must not suffer from any illusions. The process is not going to be smooth. The process is not going to be okay and safe for everyone. It is going to take time. We just need to look at the history, how apartheid was demolished, and how South Africa is better than us now, why South Africa is better than us now. So that is another angle of view that we need to put, because we may run the risk of focusing on a particular event, and then we'll be disappointed after that. We have been having dialogues for many years since independence, and we've got an outcome. Let us now use our agents to push, and that points to the question that one of the participants has raised: what other forms of action that we can use? We are in a military regime, and it's very, very dangerous. I know, I've experienced it. I'm not well at the moment. I was poisoned late last year. It's very brutal. No one is safe. But the old and tested forms are still the most relevant, in my view. Mass action, mass mobilization. Why people in the liberation movement, they then departed from the Chinoy experience to mass mobilization, Pungwes and the like. It is the only realization that the only power that can withstand military power is the people's power. So the old and tested forms are still the most relevant. Whilst we take in the new things, we need to defer back to our experiences And we also need to look at what others have done, even in the contemporary. As we speak, people in Burma facing a very fierce dictatorship and military regime, they are in the streets. People in Myanmar, they are in the streets. You have also seen what the Arab Springs brought. Of course, the revolution was then hijacked and it didn't work in some of the countries, but they've got a history and experience to rely on. And Tunisia is up to now, and Morocco to some extent, they're still utilizing that history. So we can also rely on our own national and regional and continental liberation struggles, and it attests to this. So my call is that whilst we focus on the national dialogue as if we are saying it started in 2018, we need to take into account the dialogue and all its forms and all its action that we have been engaging in since 1980 and its outcomes, and look at how we can ensure that the 2013 Constitution is respected by all, and we have transformative constitutionalism in this country. Otherwise, if we don't do that and use people's power, we are going to come out with a dialogue document that will also be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. May I just read two posts? One is from Nomak Gumoyo. It's very hard to think the current regime will be willing to have any meaningful dialogue because they are afraid some of the discourse may lead to their displacement since it's so near elections. I also think they are not really interested in any political reforms that will strip them of power. Then Tony Rilla, just a brief comment. Zim crisis needs shift from false expectations of reform to a conference to resolve it. Reverend Mtata, then after Reverend Mtata, I'll ask Galaxy S5, please to identify yourself, and then I'll ask Sakil and Doc to speak.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, moderator. I think I just want to make a caveat here that by national dialogue, we are also talking about a very technical process. I agree that there are different kinds of dialogues that have been happening. What has been raised by my brother Mtasa, I agree, and I think those need to continue, different platforms where Zimbabweans engage each other. But what I think we will need to do is to find a way in which these disparate or scattered conversations sort of converge into one meaningful process, culminating maybe in what Tony Rela is saying here, the national conference. And I think this must be something that builds on the momentum of the conversations of the people. And I think this is something that we need to aim towards, because if conversations become conversations for their sake, people will not find them very useful. What we need to think about is how do we build conversations, structure them in such a way that participation is known, the agenda is clarified, the issues that they are addressing are fundamental. And then these culminate into national conference processes, whether the nation agrees that these are going to be legally binding or that they are going to be loose agreements. This is something that should be the outcome of the conferences. But at the end of the day, this must culminate something that we should translate into policy. In other words, something must end up at Parliament, where Parliament must decide that this is the route we are going, whether a new structure is established to allow whatever transition will have been agreed. So I would want to separate the casual, informal conversations that must be translated into a formalized process. The second issue I wanted to come in is there any incentive for the ruling party to engage in any dialogue? I think there is an incentive because I'm not sure if this situation of having to deal with such deep disgruntlement, not only outside the ruling party, but also inside the ruling party. I think we need to come to terms with the fact that the change that took place in 2017 is not normal, even inside the ruling party, ZANU-PF. And they are still dealing with the consequences of members of the ruling party are out of the country as a result of the changes that took place in 2017. This cannot be a normal situation. So I wouldn't think that this is something that is not attractive to the ruling party. The ruling party would want to run this country on the basis of public acceptance, on the basis of constitutionally recognized processes. They would want to run this country in a way that translates into prosperity that is recognized, that is accessed by all people. So I think there is incentive for the ruling party. There is also incentive for the leadership in ZANU-PF. They've been talking about legacy when they got power in 2017. What kind of legacy do they want to leave? I know that people may say, no, maybe they are just accumulating resources for themselves. These people, many of these people who are now advanced in age, many of them want to leave a history in which they are known to have changed something positively. I think no matter how much people hate them, they also have aspirations of being known in history to have contributed to some development. And for these reasons, they know that when there is no consensus, national consensus, development becomes almost impossible to achieve. Now, there is a third issue that I also want to respond to. What exactly should this national dialogue achieve? And I think this is a perennial question. And I think we need to make this very clear that a national dialogue is not a replacement of currently existing processes. Those processes must continue. But a successful national dialogue will help us to achieve 5 clear things. The first thing it will achieve is that it will create an environment of trust and confidence so that together we are able to tackle some of the most difficult issues. I know someone was saying, no, what we just need is a reform so that we can have elections. We can never have reforms for free and fair elections when free and fair elections are not guaranteeing the securities of other people. If people are afraid that if I lose an election, I am likely to be wealth that I've acquired is likely going to be taken away from me. This person needs to be engaged so that they are given some kind of assurance about what the future, the inclusive future looks like. So elections are not a solution to this kind of situation we find ourselves. The same with a revolution that Brother Mtasa is talking about. A revolution is not a solution because a revolution only produces winners. Others become losers. And if they are going to be losers, they are going to defend the turf that they have. What we need is to design a process in which the most key stakeholders, all Zimbabweans, feel that we are imagining something that is going to be inclusive of everyone. There are going to be compromises involved. Someone is saying that, is it possible that we can negotiate with people who killed people? My answer is yes, because we must make a choice. Either someone is saying, I need to defend my security and my safety by holding onto power with all means, or they are given assurances that the crimes that they committed need to be put on the table and the victims must say, we forgive you. If we defend their own future, if people have to defend their own future, they have to defend their own future with all the resources at their disposal. If people think that Brother Mtasa, if you are thinking that a revolution is what can change things, but then this revolution must be taken to its ultimate end. If you are going to fight, you need to have all the hardware to fight until the end. Otherwise, we need to continue expecting a costly process in which many lives are going to be lost, and the new form, a resolution that is based on negotiated solution that prepares inclusive imagination of the future is the only alternative. So that we see the realization of the Constitution, we find a new way of engaging with the international community, we find a way of resolving the heads and the violent economic order. I think these are, but not least, I agree with Prof. Zamchia, and I think this culminates into a people's national dialogue. We need a people's national dialogue which must gather its own momentum and then invite political actors. Political actors have political interest, and political interest is always to acquire power. We need to start to chart an agenda that is citizens driven and that is seeking the welfare of the citizens.
Thank you, Reverend. Professor Brian, did you want to respond to something that was said before I ask the audience?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Please, can you do that? I'm sorry about the others who have raised their hands. You'll speak after Professor Brian.
Sure, thank you. I just want to say that I'm in large agreement with much of that Peter Mtasa said. I think I just wanted to make the point that the structural changes in the labor movement, in the nature of the working class, has affected the capacity. That doesn't mean other things can't be done, as he has stated. And one of the hopeful things for me that is going on is that civic voices are now beginning to lead the discussions again, because the ruling party has no real strong legitimizing message. It has lost a lot, particularly since the coup. And because of the fragmentation within the opposition, we're not getting clarity of messaging. So the kind of strong messages around national dialogue, around human rights, around economic reform that are coming out of civic groups are once again beginning to lead the debate. And I think that's a very encouraging thing. And it's something that we can build on towards building this citizenship consensus that can provide incentives for political parties. Of course, it's true, ZANU-PF at the moment, I think they feel they don't really need to come. Reverend Mtata is right about the legacy, but also that legacy issue is not sufficient to push them into this discussion. They know that post-colonial states, many of them can survive on minimalist states with coercion. And they've been doing that a great deal, especially when the forms of accumulation are built around the state. So unless there's these broader pressures from the citizenry, from the region, from the international players, we need to find a way of getting those consensus again. But the start of that has to be the citizenry and the consensus that comes out of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Yes, just give me a second. I'll ask you to speak. I want to highlight something that was said, which may relate to you. Just 1 second. But before that, I just want to read this comment again from Tony Rila. The point behind posting Iboman as a scope 8 is that the political parties are unable to lead any reform process. The ruling party cannot and will not lead reform. Thus, we are at a Lancaster House moment, both a national and regional crisis. Thus, we need a political settlement beginning nationally, moving regionally, finally internationally. This issue for dialogue is, what is the political goal? It is not about aspirations for the future, but the process to arrest collapse and the possibility of mass violence. What I wanted you to also respond to Comrade Mtasa is, the comment from Sam Kumalo, labor unions should reinvent themselves to include the informal sector. Its current structure and definition are quite colonial and neoliberal. As a result, it fails to reflect the current and emerging economic players largely in the informal sector. There is also untapped labor players in the diaspora. How can they be harnessed into the local labor union structures for the purposes of borderless movement building? Thanks. Please, Sakilendov and Kalisi, I'm just asking the participant, the speaker, to respond to some of the issues. I still have you in mind. Yes, the Comrade Ntasa.
Right, thank you. I want to agree with Prof on what he has just said, and that is what we are talking about: citizenry, active citizenry, and citizen agents. I would also want to respond to Dr. Mtata and set this clearly. Of course, he has brought our language, the revolutionary language. I had said citizen agents, active citizenry and citizenry agents, but we also are happy that he brought the revolutionary argument into it. So a revolution can take many forms. We can have social revolution in this country without spilling any blood, but just agreeing on an idea, and an idea that transforms lives, and it becomes revolutionary in that, and progressive revolution. We have had some revolutionary moments, and many times I want to push back to Zimbabweans who are disillusioned and losing hope to what we have achieved to be our career of hope. The 2013 Constitution, we may not value it because of the way the players who are in charge are handling it. But if it was being implemented as it is, it was going to be a revolutionary moment for Zimbabwe from the period that we were used at. South Africa has had revolutionary moments since its struggle against apartheid. The way they have defended their constitution, even after the national dialogue, after CODESA, and after the apartheid, they have continued to use their citizenry agents to defend the constitution. This is why it is unheard of in Africa that a sitting president can be removed, but in South Africa it happened. If you look at these issues, some may say it's simply because there's no violence, but I would want to argue and say violence is actually stopped by the citizens' actions. So it is the citizens' actions that normally stops such violence. So when we are talking about a revolution, Doc referent, let's not just look at the violence that is always associated with revolutions, but look also at revolutions in terms of ideas, in terms of progressive ideas and progressive programs. So we think we can still gain some of the things that we want through a revolutionary approach, where citizens use their agents. Currently, we have the Chilonga issue. What are the ideas that churches, what are the ideas that civic society has that can ensure that those people are protected in terms of their constitutional rights that are enshrined in the Constitution? If we then throw away the whole Constitution, which has those rights, which are quite progressive, and not utilize some of the rights that are in there, and wait for negotiating with some people who do not even care about you and me, they are amassing their wealth, something that when they've got billions, they will stop. They will not stop. They will wait until their kids have got millions. And when they have millions, they won't stop until their grandkids and grandchildren have got billions also. So we need to not to focus on one issue about a formalized dialogue. We need that formalized dialogue, and Prof is correct that it now should lead to civic society, it now should lead to communities coming up with some formal thing for them to move forward. So this is what we mean when we talk about a revolution. we already are in a revolution because the 2013 constitution outcome is revolutionary in nature. If we attain everything that is there, we would have progressed in this country. Then on unions, definitely not just unions, churches, students' movement, civic society, they are not what they used to be. And we need to adapt. And Glenn is very correct. We need to adapt. What I am against and which I always propagate is we should not use those developments as an excuse for us for not organizing and mobilizing and seeking change. We also have, whilst there is dissemination of unions, we also have advantages in unions today than unions in the past. So how do we harness the advantages that we have of communication? How do we harness the advantage that we have of road networks and easy transport than the people who organize? If you hear the stories about the people who organized in the 1990s, even the formation of the MDC itself, how people walked many kilometers to reach communities. And we are now even better privileged. We are privileged. I say, if those who fought for our struggle look at us, they will laugh at us if we say we can't do anything because we are privileged than they were. So this is the point that I'm driving. In terms of adapting, the whole world, neoliberalism has decimated unions. But we need to, this is why we need to also take an ideological approach to it. Maybe unions have failed to properly point out the challenges of neoliberalism, austerity, and the like, because we still have some human rights defenders, both in legal fraternity and also in other social movements, who support neoliberalism and support the conveyors of neoliberalism on one hand, and then fight for human rights on the other hand. There are no human rights if we do not protect the labor rights, if we do not protect the rights of children, rights of women, those groups that are naturally oppressed and repressed. So this is what we need to fight, and this is why the ZCT is calling for a dual approach, a dual agenda approach. We need to fight both repression and also fight neoliberalism, the exploitation. So if we don't fight exploitation and hope that fighting repression will resolve the issues, you will see that we'll also have new players who also want to oppress. So this is why we need to fight both repression and exploitation. But unions, churches, student movements have to adapt. For the labor movement, we've tried with the help of our academia, the Prof. Rapstopoulos, Sachkonye, and many others who have been assisting unions to adapt. This is why long back we then formed association, Zimbabwe Chamber of Informal Economy Association, and we are organizing in the informal economy. All our activities we include, and we have informal sectors effective participation in our activities. We may need ideas on how to do it better, but what we really are lacking at the moment is organizing effectively, mobilizing effectively, and rallying everyone around. And this is what is lacking in most organizations everywhere, students, churches. And it's not out of our own making in some of the cases. The regime that we are dealing with is also very, very cunning. If you see at how it is trying to decimate the opposition and how it is attacking it, you can see that it's very cunning and it's got many apparatus around it. But what will give us success is solidarity. And this is what we are currently missing in this country. Each sector is running on its own thing. It's ignored by everyone. The solidarity that you get is one or two people commenting and it's done. And the next thing is the other. So I don't really recall the guy who said they first came for the socialist and I said, no, well, I'm not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unions, they came for the churches, until they've dealt with everyone else and he's only alone. Then he realized that he made a mistake when he did not stand with the people who were being attacked. And this is why we are saying, we are not saying support MDC Alliance. I'm not saying that. We are simply saying, when they are attacking a particular, when they attacked the churches, the reverends, and the bishops, the whole nation should have stood up and supported the bishops, because we are doing so not because we are Catholics. We are doing so because we are defending freedom of speech. We are defending democracy. When they attack an opposition party, the only party that gave them a real challenge in 2018, we do so, we must stand with it because we are defending democracy in multi-party democracy. When they attack the students, when they attack labor, we do so. So this is the best defense that we have, and it can only be harnessed if we organize well and mobilize well. And this also goes to the issue of elections. At times, they are also necessary for us to utilize what is provided in the Constitution. We do it for many reasons. We should do it, one, to test. If we had not gone for elections in 2018, we would not know many things that we know about the current regime and its approach. We also do some of these things for legitimation. Many times we are asked, why do unions go for tripartite negotiating forum and speak to people who don't listen and who don't care? We do so to legitimize our demands. Once we go through that process, even someone who supports ZANU-PF and is a worker cannot tell us that, but you have not engaged them. We tell them, we give them all the processes and say we have negotiated with them, this is the outcome, and then legitimate our demands. So I think we are going we must be thinking around not one pathway. This is why we seemingly challenge this one pathway of national dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade, and thank you for smoking the peace pipe with Reverend Mtata. S5, are you still there? Sakile and Zovo? Sakile and Zovo, S5. Okay.
Dr. Mpofu.
Oh, okay. Yes, Paul.
I'm using as budget. The network
okay, go ahead.
is horrible this end. Can you hear? Right. There was a question that my young brother, Reverend Mtata, responded to. The incentivization for ZANU-PF. I think it's something that we need to discuss. We need, through these platforms, to say why ZANU-PF has an option to be part of this national dialogue, apart from the fact that they are in power, apart from the fact that for the past 40 years, they have cloned this country in their own image. Part of the incentive that they have, part of the reason they have, is that this is why they fought for the liberation of this country in the first place. They did not struggle so that this country would experience the levels of poverty that we're experiencing at the moment. I'm sure when he spoke of the leadership accord, where each leader would be apportioned 50 acres of land, they knew exactly why they were doing that. We now need to assist them to get back to the original reasons why the struggle was waged against colonialism. It was waged so that we, Zimbabwe, would enjoy the freedoms that were being denied by ruling minority racist regime. We need to assist ZANU-PF rediscover its liberation credentials. It has to ask itself why, during its tenure in government, it has had its own internal fissures. Edgar Tekere leaving the party, Margaret Long leaving the party, G40 problems, what's her name, Mujuru leaving, and so forth and so on. All those things have had an effect, a very negative effect on the country's progress. Unfortunately, ZANU's business is not just ZANU's business, it is all our business. And we need to get kicking and whatever means we need to use for them to be part of this dialogue so that together we can recalibrate this country. We have to get back to a country where there is not as much poverty and suffering as we are witnessing now. We have to say together as Zimbabweans, Where are these autocratic tendencies coming from? They can't be part of our liberation history. There must be a new to our state. Why has the cartels taken over our country? That's not what we fought for. How come that a liberation party that enjoyed so much international solidarity now complains of illegal sanctions? What has happened? We need to get together with ZANU and introspect as Zimbabweans. Why do we have a collapsed infrastructure? Why do we as a country have thousands and thousands of our people outside the country, millions and millions of our people unemployed? That is why ZANU's business is all our business. We have to bring ZANU to Zimbabwe, talk to itself, and to rediscover the business power, the reason being in government. It can't just be for individual self-sustenance or self-aggrandizement. It has to be about making the country that we fought for. That is why this time is absolutely is a life and death thing as far as I'm concerned. It's not just about the niceties talking to one another. It's about giving life to ordinary Zimbabweans who are finding it extremely difficult to exist in this environment. I thought it was absolutely, I'm hoping that my colleague, my friend Mutsonga is listening to this because he's going to come back and talk to us. He needs to understand that one, ZANU-PF does not own this country. This country, all of us as Zimbabweans, we happened to have given them an opportunity to lead us, not to lead us into corruption, not to lead us into failed systems, failed health, failed education, and so on. It is a privilege that people from time to time give you an opportunity to lead. I think that's what ZANU needs to rediscover. And we can do that when we sit together as Zimbabweans and begin to remind ourselves of the purpose of leadership and the purpose of power.
Thank you, Paul. I still. Thank you, Paul. I think you are off now. I'm not sure if there are any more questions, because I'll ask the speakers if they have anything else briefly to say, either to respond to what Paul said or to some of the things that were raised. But I think one of the issues that I should say emanating from the speakers, one of them is from Reverend Mtata earlier in the morning, who said we have to make sure that if there is dialogue, it's not a dialogue of the elite, that we have the elite. And I think he referred to the GPA, GNU, and he referred also to the Intercourt, that with what we may refer to as elite pacts, where maybe citizens are not involved and maybe they do not see the benefit of the dialogue as well. And having said that, Comrade Mtasa, you referred to Chilonga and what is happening there. I think some of you may have seen the support, a dairy company that is pushing villagers away. I think it goes back to some of the questions that have been raised as well. I think Sam Kumalo raised it about the nature of labor that is changing. And Comrade Peter also referred to the changing nature also of student unions as well. Maybe those are some of the things that we may respond to. I think Brian talked about the issue of the national question as well, the issue of citizenship. How is that addressed if we have a national dialogue? Speakers, do you have anything else to say before I ask for a discussion? Reverend Mtata.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I also appreciate the clarification given by PG Mtasa and Brian Prof. Raftopoulos. I think the idea, and I think is it Mr. Mpofu who came in also and highlighted why it is important when we are talking about inclusive. You can't say you want to have an inclusive a national dialogue process, and you say in that inclusive dialogue, ZANU-PF must not be involved, because then it defeats the idea of inclusiveness. I think one of the issues that I also want us to note as we are deliberating on this issue is that national dialogue is going to be opposed.
Your network is bad. We are losing you.
By one particular party, but by different actors for whom the status quo is of benefit. They are going to negotiate and find an inclusive. Can you hear?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Just 1 minute here.
Yeah, yes. Is it clear?
It is very clear, Reverend.
Yeah, so what I was saying is that we need to realize that the notion of an inclusive imagination of the future is likely to be opposed by some people, both in the ruling party and outside the ruling party. There are some in the ruling party who find the current murky environment, which is something that is beneficial for them. So any clarity on how we run a clean economy, any imagination of a future where the constitution is adhered to in letter and spirit, any future where we no longer have those we accuse as our enemies, when we no longer have any sanctions, any future where we have resolved our heads of the past. They can't imagine such a future because there will be too much light in the room. So they enjoy when there is darkness and only a few people are enjoying the wealth of the nation. And there are a few people who are going to fight tooth, nail, and all their energy to make sure that there is nothing that brings sanity on Zimbabwe in the ruling party. There are people in the opposition who are also going to fight any possibility of finding an inclusive negotiated processes because they believe they are the only ordained democratic fighters for democracy. They feel that they are entitled to fight for democracy, and therefore they can't imagine a platform in which all Zimbabweans are going to be included. This sense of entitlement will make them say, if there is going to be any dialogue, if there is going to be any engagement, it must be only for them and in their own terms. And some of these people will say, if we go into any form of negotiated outcomes to the future, are we not going to give a lifeline to ZANU-PF like we did in 2009? So for some, any idea of a negotiated solution for the future is completely unacceptable because they are afraid this may give an opportunity for ZANU-PF to rebuild. So we have formidable forces against any negotiation or dialogue for the future, simply for selfish reasons. And therefore, Zimbabweans will need to say, let's commit ourselves to something that is not aimed at benefiting only a few people, but that is aimed at building a legacy of a democratic society, a society that is developing where the wealth of the nation is shared among all Zimbabweans, where our politics is not based on cultic following, where our politics is not based on violence, where our politics is not based on fear, but where we build a future in which anyone who has an idea can put it on the table, it gets debated. And on the basis of this debate, a new consensus is built going forward. So I just wanted to highlight this possibility of resistance because there is a possibility that this resistance may not necessarily come from the leader, from President Mnangagwa. It is likely maybe not even to come from Chamisa. It is maybe not going to come from Onzora. But there are many people around them for whom any solution to the current conundrum is likely to give them a sense of loss or uncertainty. Therefore, we need to be aware of this as we are pursuing this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Ref. Speakers, I'm just giving you 2 minutes. Please just make it brief if you have something to add on to that. Madam Sefela Ngoma, do you have something to say, just to round up? Just 2 minutes, please. I'll also ask Brian and then I'll ask Peter.
I think it's important to realize that, just to remind the room that currently as Zimbabwean citizens, we are facing phenomenal amounts of negative outcomes. The failure to undertake new processes of talking to each other, because all solutions start with when people start talking to each other, and the failure to begin the conversation in a way that is sustainable, in the way that is meaningful, essentially means that we as the citizens are the ants in the grass that are suffering whilst elephants are fighting. And I want to remind the room that, it doesn't matter. Yes, we've had good rains. Yes, we are looking at a rainy season that has given us more than what we anticipated. And my understanding is that it's going to be our second largest harvest that we've had, for a significant period of time. But does that mean that people will get their monies from GMB? As we speak, for example, we have not seen the funding modalities around that thing. We know what happened, for example, with the cotton farmers who also had a bumper harvest. And so when we look at whether we're talking about agriculture, we're looking at livelihoods in a big sense, we're looking at the economy, we're looking at issues of housing that no one builds for us, but that we build for ourselves. When we are looking at issues around water, which we seem to take for granted, that we've been in a COVID crisis where the simple act of washing your hands could save your life, and we didn't have access to water. And we are talking about water as if it is something that can be delivered by a local authority and not a national problem. We are not going to be able to appreciate the depth of the crisis that we are in. We are the ones who are currently feeling the heat of not being able to move Zimbabwe forward. It is incumbent on us as citizens to talk about how do we get ourselves out of this mess, and to engage with those who have the various mandates, and to engage in processes where we might create a particular mandate for the purposes of securing a particular outcome. And I think that's the fundamental principle that I hope citizens remember in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakile. Professor Brian, do you have anything? 2 minutes, please.
No, I have nothing more to add at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Comrade Peter, 2 minutes.
Right. Thank you, moderator. And I think I'm just putting my parting shots maybe, but I want to point out that with all that we have been discussing, and not just in this platform, in all other platforms, I think what is urgent at the moment is let us organize ourselves, all of us, churches, students, labor, civil society. Let us organize ourselves, and I'm tempted to think that probably this argument we've been discussing, maybe this is the time for the second Working People's Convention, where we sit down and clarify our agenda. I think that's very, very important. We cannot be like popcorns, each one popping at its own time. Let us organize ourselves, clarify our agenda, mobilize for it. Then we seriously mobilize for it. We have got weaknesses and fragilities. You have pointed out fragilities of labor. We've pointed out fragilities of the churches, of students. But I think if we are united around a cause, we can deal away with some of those fragilities and some of those challenges that we face. So we need to organize, clarify, mobilize for our agenda, and take action. This is quite important. I've heard some rulers calling rebels for dialogue. It is possible for those in power to call the citizens for dialogue, but it can only be possible if the citizens are organized and mobilized and also taking action on their agenda. And I also want to point out that we need to stand in solidarity with all who are under attack. So it doesn't mean you are a trade unionist if you stand with us when we are under attack. It means you are defending democracy, you are defending freedoms, you are also defending social justice. It also doesn't mean you like the politics of MDCT or MDC alliance if it is under attack. If it is under attack, you are defending democracy, you are defending multi-party democracy, you are defending the constitution. Then in my view, and I don't want to prescribe, we cannot afford to prescribe if we are to organize ourselves and clarify the agenda. But I think the broad agenda is transformative constitutionalism. We need to not to dump this progress that we attained in 2013. Let it work, let the constitution work, let the military stay in the barracks. Let ZEC be independent. Let ZAC be independent. Let the judiciary be without reproach. The Chief Justice cannot continue beyond 70 years. So transformative constitutionalism, seeing the constitution living and experiencing it. But on the actual issues, we think as labor, we are supposed to fight against repression. Repression is too much in this country, and that is an agenda that is urgent for all of us. Repression in dispossession and displacements of people from their land, repression in unlawful detentions, all forms of repression, and also exploitation. So we must also fight for Gutsa Ruzhinji. This is the time to fight for an egalitarian society, and we've got experience for that, and we've got also a cool word for that, Gutsa Ruzhinji. This is that time to fight for that. Is it Intando Kulu in Isindebele? Forgive me, comrades, I am trying, but this is the time. This is the time to fight for Gutsa Ruzhinji. This is the time to fight against the repression. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Peter. For those who just joined in, our topic today is elusive political, electoral, and economic reforms in Zimbabwe. Is national dialogue the solution? And this is hosted by the Public Policy and Research Institute of Zimbabwe. My second last speaker was going to briefly, we asked her to pick and put together and weave some of the things that we have raised. Who's our discussant today is Dr. Gracious Maviza. She's with the Institute for Development Studies at NAST, and she particularly focuses their research on migration and local economies and development and livelihoods in relation to gender. Dr. Maviza, please, you can proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Mpofu, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity that I've been given to wrap up the discussion that we've had today. I'd like to thank you all for this engaging discussion, and to our panelists and presenters who have gone before me. This has been a very interesting discussion we've had today. There is no doubt from the engagement that we've had that our country is indeed faced with multifaceted challenges that have affected the lives of the masses. And if we look at our country right now, Zimbabwe has really made a little progress, or registered little progress, in terms of political and electoral and economic reforms. There are promises that have been made that are severely lagging behind, and very few tangible steps that have been achieved towards the reconfiguration of the electoral, economic, and political systems. And from the discussions that have been ongoing, that stands out clearly that we still have a bit of mileage to cover, and there is need for real change and reforms that will go beyond a mere rhetoric of changes that are being there and being perhaps pushed. And as a country, the question that we are grappling with today is national dialogue the answer really for these challenges that we are faced with, for us to address them? And the problems that are confronting the country are actually, if you look at it, are much bigger than mere politics. I think Svelani has been reiterating this over and over to say it goes beyond politics to speak about everyday issues of water, education, electricity, and everything. And the national dialogue process, if it's to be the answer, must involve all stakeholders in the national visioning process that has every stakeholder involved. And today, as the civil society, we're saying there is need for engagement at that level where everyone is involved and takes part in this. And from the engagements of the day, there is no doubt that there is need for swift and effective action that address the plethora of challenges that are plaguing our country and its populace. What I picked from all the presentations and the discussion that has been going through from Reverend Dr. Mtata, he is indicating that elections or a revolution, as it were, may not be the best pathway to take in terms of dealing with the issues that we are faced with, because it produces what he calls winners and losers. And for the winners, there will be need for them to defend their win. And it doesn't take us to that place of everyone being taken care of at the end of the day. But however, according to him, a national dialogue is the answer, but it has to be an all-inclusive process that discusses the actual needs of the people, the rest of the other means to the rest being the other means to an end, and being the rest are actually a means to an end and are exclusive in nature, and in some instances they privilege the elite. And in doing that, he referred to the GNU that we had in the past as a nation. And then going to Svelani, she actually indicated that national dialogue is a potential solution. However, how do we make sure that the process is national at the end of the day? And if the dialogue is to be effective, it has to be broad-based and all-inclusive, not only for the elite. So she shares the same sentiments with Dr. Mtata in that regard. And then Professor Raftopoulos actually indicates that national dialogue must be about how we define national belonging and nationhood. Unless and until we understand what it means to be Zimbabwean as Zimbabweans, it's going to leave us with a lot of issues to grapple with. So there is need for a clear and shared vision of nationhood. What does it mean to be Zimbabwean? Are we seeing ourselves as Zimbabweans, or we are seeing ourselves as differentiated according to our ethnicities and where we come from, regionalism and stuff like that? And then for Peter Mtasa, he indicated that there is need to understand what we are dialoguing about and then have to deal with the root causes of the challenges that we are faced with. And if we're going to dialogue, what is the anticipated outcome? That was his main, what I picked to be one of the main issues that he indicated. And he says that although national dialogue is a possible solution, there is an alternative that we could have that could be an anchor or the pedestal upon which we stand when we are dealing with national dialogues. And he says that is building an active citizen participation, building citizen agency, and then solidarity, which in other terms speaks of revolution. And he emphasizes that there is need to organize, clarify ourselves, clarify the agenda, mobilize for it, and then present a united front around our causes and then take action. Unless and until we take action, it's going to remain a mere rhetoric at the end of the day. And therefore, what I'm picking from all these engagements today is that it is clear that for Zimbabwe to move forward and perhaps have some of their issues addressed, national dialogue may be the answer, and with perhaps some other alternatives that may come along. And even if national dialogue is the answer, what I pick from the discussions of the day is that there is need for, number one, to ensure citizen empowerment, build citizen agency, have neighbor, keep neighbor approach, Ubuntu kind of approach to our issues, and make sure that collectively we stand against what may be plaguing our country and affecting us as a nation. And then there is need, I'll reiterate what Mr. Mtasa said, to organize ourselves, clarify the agenda for the dialogue, mobilize for it, and then present a united front and then take action. And there is need for a shared national vision and for shared nationhood, like Professor Raftopoulos put it. And in so doing, we are sure to have an approach or a national dialogue that is going to address our issues for us as a nation, not as fragmented individuals or sections of the populace. And then there is need for a clear role of the CSOs and the FBOs in our country, as these act as the watchdog to the government and protecting the rights of the people, and to build and advance a common position that is people-centered. When you look at the churches, for instance, they are supposed to be the country's moral compass, and then the CSOs are the watchdog of the government to make sure that people's interests are taken care of at the end of the day. And there is also need to ensure that there is multiple stakeholder buy-in, participation of a wide variety of stakeholders and groups to avoid perceptions of bias. There's been a sentiment to say, what is going to bring ZANU-PF onto the negotiations table if there is nothing in it for them? So there is need to make sure that this process is all-encompassing, all stakeholders are taken care of, their interests and their rights are taken care of, so that there are no perceptions of bias. No one feels like the process is out there to perhaps take their power, or we put it that way. And then there is need to ensure a shared agenda. What is it that we are about? What is it that we envision as the outcome of the process of the national dialogue? And then there is need to ensure transparency in the whole process. And above all, there is need to learn from past experiences. Professor Raftopoulos actually alluded to this when he took us back to the historical events of past negotiations, citing the Lancaster House and all that, where we need to learn from the mistakes and the wins of the past experiences, so that at the end of the day, whatever we are engaging in as a national dialogue does not fall into the same trap or pit of what previous negotiations fell into. And for the process to be credible at the end of the day, there is need for a credible convener in all fronts to say the process then is seen as unbiased and addressing the needs of all at the end of the day, the interests of all the actors in the process. And there is also a need to make sure that at the end of the day, the all-encompassing approach that we may take to this national dialogue is born or anchored on the active citizen participation, to avoid elite pacts and elite talks, as it were, and make sure that the grassroots are represented and they are taken on board in making sure that they are part of the national dialogue processes. We avoid national dialogue processes or consultative forums that are just done for mere purposes of ticking boxes to say we went to such a place and engaged 1, 2, 3 people, yet it was not as meaningful and empowering to the citizen to make sure that their voices are heard. Clearly, there is a need, therefore, to seize the moment to reevaluate and adapt the dialoguing strategies and policies to ensure the process is an all-inclusive process and people-centered. The process of it is not going to be as smooth as sentiments have come already. There's going to be some friction here and there, but what is going to keep us going, what I gather from today's engagement, is that what will keep the people going or the nation going in the national dialogue is a shared agenda, a shared outcome, an envisioned future that we would want to see coming out of those engagements. And it therefore goes without saying that for any negotiation plans to be effective and sustainable, there must be a promotion of constitutionalism, what TASA is called transformative constitutionalism, and it has to be all-inclusive. All stratas of society should be included. It has to be gender sensitive. No one has to be left out at the end of the day, and these should be anchored on a participation of an empowered citizenry that will stand to advocate for what they want to see in their country and in the politics of the day and the governance of our country in our current setting. Thank you, Dr. Mpofu.
Thank you, Dr. Maviza, for that summary of our proceedings today. May I now proceed and invite the Director of the Public Policy and Research Institute of Zimbabwe, Dr. Gordon Moyo. He was supposed to speak in the morning, but because of connectivity problems. Dr. Moyo is going to be our last speaker.
Thank you, Program Director, and thank you, colleagues. I am not going to take much of your time. I just want to put on the table some 3-4 key points that should act as our thinking lenses as we go forward. I just want to put on the table some broad issues that I should have said ahead of the colleagues that have really gone deep into the roots of the challenges that we face in the country, because mine are broader and more generalized issues. And number one, colleagues, I think it is important as civic society leadership and academics and labor that we look at the global dynamics. As we close this discussion, it is important to
Talk your connection.
The issues in the initiative dialogue as a major player, a key player that is now pervasive in our politics, in our economics, in our elections, generally speaking. I'm sure colleagues would appreciate that the Chinese footprints are all over. The Chinese are in the economy, the Chinese are in the farming, in agriculture, in the mining sector. The government of Zimbabwe is modeling itself in the image of Beijing. And Beijing, as you would all agree, is one power where issues of human rights, where issues of labor rights, of environment, of democracy are not on the table for them. And yet the government, the structure of our government is such that it is modeling itself. Its governance structure, its ethos is now being modeled around Beijing. I think it is important as we debate, as we discuss and formulate the strategies way forward, to say, where is China in all this? Are we engaging China? Is it a player in this dialogue that we are talking about? If we leave China out, what does it mean? Remember, China is dictating, even in terms of the financing aspect of our economy. They are financing our infrastructure, they are financing the running of the ruling party and others. So they are a key player. So what is our take? That's the question that I'm putting on the table as we go out and reflect about the kind of national dialogue that we need in the country. In the past, China was never mentioned. It was never real key. But looking at the global dynamics, you would know that China is now the second largest economy globally. It is a major trading partner with Zimbabwe and major trading partner and an investment, a key investor in the continent. So it is important. I put on the table number two. Number two is the broader issue of the nature of the state, which colleagues here referred to. We can't avoid the issue of the nature of the state, the attitude of the state. Our state is such that We have the military, as colleagues raised before, are now major players. They are not just the securocrats securing our borders. They are there in decision-making structures and institutions of the country. So when we debate, when we engage about dialogue, we need to think strategically and say, where do we locate the militarisans, as I call them, the militarisans, because they've got business and commercial interest. They are not just the military officers, but they are interested in business, in commercial activities of the country, and in governance of the country. So where do we locate them? These are big questions. They are not small questions, and I'm not pretending to be having any answers to that. And as we go out, let's go and reflect about these issues. They are critical. Again, I put on the table number 3. And colleagues, I think, amplify. Sarah Apollos raised this. So was Phelan, so was Dr. raised this issue. We have the democracy promoting community, which is in disarray. The democracy campaigners are in disarray. We are factionalized, sectoralized, so divided, without a common vision. And yet we all want the same thing. So we need to put this on the table. When we, as a civil society, as a democracy campaigning community, we need to have some kind of shared understanding in order to be able to engage the state governors and state managers. If the democracy campaigners themselves are factionalized, are so divided, have no common glue, social glue and cultural glue, then there is a problem. So this is an issue that I'm putting on the table. It's known, it was raised. I'm only footnoting the colleagues that raised this issue. I put on the table number 4, COVID politics and weaponization of COVID, which is going to be with us for a long time. I don't foresee reality, new normal, I mean, the old normal coming back to us within the next 4 months. It is a context that we have up until 2020. So as we restructure our engagement in an environment being used to clamp down democracy campaigners, labor unionists, journalists, and everybody else, it is important that we put this into perspective because it is now our new context that we are now operating in. I put number 4, number 5 perhaps, which is my last one. The paradox of the story of Zimbabwe, where Zimbabwe is a country, as colleagues raised. We are a country with educated population, a country with all the resources that we need to prosper and progress as a country. We are a country with all the natural resources, the minerals, agricultural, arable land, it's all there. Our cultural diversity, biodiversity, wildlife, fisheries, all it is there. Right? The paradox is that the country since the 21st century has been in this perpetual crisis. We have never known progress in the 21st century, and yet we have got all these advantages, including the youthful population, the demographic dividend that we have. That's a big thing. Therefore, the issue of national dialogue becomes one solution that should be carefully considered, as the colleague raised. And I put the submission on the table that the leadership that is here, if you look at the leadership that is here, civil society, I was looking at the list of the people who are here. The leadership of civic society, the academics, and various other stakeholders. It's such that it is almost a representative of the think tank of the country, of the elite, civic elite of the country.
Dr. Moyo, you're on mute now. Dr. Moyo, if you hear me, you muted your gadget, maybe by mistake. I don't think that, okay. Dr. Moyo, you muted your gadget. Can you repeat your final remarks?
My last statement is that we need a national dialogue of the civic society itself, even before talking about the national dialogue with the state governors, with the government and everybody else. There is a need for a shared vision by the civics, the church and the labor. I'm not suggesting that this has not been done. I'm that this is a novel idea. I think it's important to reassure ourselves that are we on the same mode? Are we a program director? This afternoon we'll be having another session with the political leadership. The political leadership should stay, but as a civic society leadership here, I think there are organizations that have been convening. It is important to go back and think about a national convention for civic society to have a shared understanding about the national dialogue itself. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon Moyo. May I take this opportunity to thank everyone who attended today, and in particular to thank all our speakers who took their time as well to go through the topics for us. As Dr. Moyo has also reiterated, we have the second session of this meeting in the afternoon at 2. I've just sent the link. So Public Policy and Research Institute of Zimbabwe are hosting the second session at 2 with political players. May we please attend? Thank you very much. Let's meet at 2.